Hello my loves, I'm Ellie Frost. Thank you so much for being on my channel where we are talking about the multi-dimensional approach to rapidly and radically healing and transforming during and after narcissistic abuse. And I wanted to make this video on why after a period of time we want to go back to the narcissist, because this is like, it is the most common thing. Yeah, we know this person hurt us. We know they're abusive. Yeah, but we'll get this urge to want to return, want to get their attention, want to make it right with them. We'll try and like reestablish the relationship, even though it was a very painful, very hurtful, abusive relationship. What's going on? Here's what I think. A couple of things, right? One is, in the spiritual realm, it's a psychic war. It's a spiritual war. Like, they are messing with your psyche. So a narcissist likes you to be dependent on them. And whether we know it consciously or not, we've made them our source of survival in some way, right? Validation, approval, connection, love, support, security. We think that we need them in some way. And in my experience, the most common times when we want to reach out, and I know this from, well, I'll speak from what I've done, right, is when something's not going right in my life. When I start feeling powerless, when I start feeling helpless, and I'm looking like to reestablish the connection or the communication with the narcissist, because I'm not having like my own sovereignty. I'm not feeling like I can be a complete source to my own self. I don't, like that's when we reach out again. It's also when, so I know, like, I'll give you another example. Because I wasn't very good at setting boundaries, right? And I was used to being punished for having any wants and needs. That's how I grew up. And later, that's how I experienced things in my relationships. It was really hard for me to understand how people got away with saying what they wanted and doing what they wanted. And I was, like, if I ever said anything that I wasn't happy with, it felt like it was being rejected, and I was being punished for putting in a boundary or pointing out that something just wasn't right about what was going on. So I said in the last video, like, what they do to our subconscious, but it makes us doubt ourselves so much, right? So we live in this self-doubt. We live in low self-esteem. We live in this worry that we've got to try harder, work harder, be better, like prove to them who we are, try and get their approval, need them for our own survival instincts often. Like, I was definitely in situations where I couldn't survive, where I didn't think I could. And it's really scary to decide that you're going to believe in something bigger than that. You're going to believe that the universe is going to support you in claiming your sovereignty, claiming your ability to survive, to be loved, to be validated, to be, cherished, understood, all that kind of stuff, without abuse. Yeah, this stuff conditions us so like highly that like we think we need it for our survival, especially if something goes wrong, especially if we're going through a time where our trauma gets reignited. Yeah. And narcissists are always going to want to reignite your trauma. You'll know you're dealing with them. One, you'll be confused. Two, you'll be given a false sense of security, a false sense of connection. You'll probably have overshared. You'll probably then notice some red flags, but you'll want to believe in the hype, because there'll be some kind of carrot. There'll be, like they say, like the donkey and the carrot, like, there'll be some kind of prize that you think you'll be getting. People have written on here, and it's absolutely true, that prize could be the kind of fairy tale story of like, well, we got through all our differences and suddenly we were like madly in love. We're kind of sold that lie. That prize could be that the things that they promised you would come true, right? They future fake all the time. They tell you that, like, they'll promise you commitment, but they'll always put it off. They'll guilt and shame you into like, always be working harder, always be wanting to change, always thinking you're the one, you're the reason, you're the problem. Yeah, and I'm here to tell you very clearly, you are not. But when we're going through trauma and our trauma gets ignited, we tend, like, it is really natural to want to reach out to the people who traumatized us, that we felt close to, because they were our connections. And coming into our own sovereign power means resisting that urge, yeah? And sometimes you're going to fail. Sometimes you're going to fail. And they're not always going to hoover you. They'll feel in the energy field. Like, have you noticed this? They'll feel like when you're not interested and you think you've healed, they'll hoover you. When you're desperate or feeling traumatized or needy, like you need someone, that's when you'll probably want to reach out to them and they'll ignore you. This is how it works. A game of cat and mouse. It's just like, it's so paralyzing. It's crippling, right? And when you come across a new one, they will somehow know how to reignite past trauma. They know it in this psychic realm. And our issue is the amount of guilt and shame we feel, the amount of loss of self, like how much we beat ourselves up. So one thing to do is just compassion. It's just like, you know, a lot of these relationships, I know in my life, I went over and over again, like, what could I have done differently? What went wrong? And what actually happened was they just pushed me so far, you know, that in the end I'd shut it down. Or maybe I'd react in a way that I knew wasn't my highest self, you know, like I'd act out or that kind of stuff. So if you've done that, no, it's really normal, yeah? And what that does is, again, create guilt and shame, because we feel like, how could I have done that? You know, we're so ashamed of ourselves for reacting. But you have to understand that when you're antagonized and pushed, there comes a point where any person can't handle psychological warfare, and we're going to act out. It's just human nature. We can't, like, it's like we're imploding inside. So how do you deal with this? How do you take your power back? I think, honestly, like, the first thing is just compassion with yourself. That's what I have to do a lot, because in narcissistic abuse, the biggest thing is confusion. It's the big, like, for me personally, it was like going round and round in my head about, could I have changed this? Could I have done something differently? All this blame and shame, and I was doing my best. And it's hard to know that when you've got no one outside saying, look, you're doing your best. Like, and this person is deliberately manipulating you, deliberately trying to bring you down, deliberately trying to be destructive. So just treat yourself like a child. Self-partner. Tell yourself it's okay. Dealing with the fear of what it means, like the fear of consequences. So as a family member, it's like the shame of that is massive, you know. My dad was terrible to me. Like, he just discarded me for no reason, apart from we had one conversation in my apartment where he was bullying me and shouting at me, and I said, look, I'm not going to let you talk to me like that anymore. And I never did that before then. And he was so, his ego got so upset about that, because, you know, like, he was used to just coming in and deriding me when he wanted to, like, kind of, I don't know, he'd get his, like, energy hit, or, you know, he got off on that, I think. But, like, I started to communicate, and that really did bother him. So he just didn't ever speak to me again. And our whole dynamic was based on him being abusive and me chasing him. So he'd be abusive, I'd think there was something wrong with me, and I'd phone him and call him and chase, and you know what I mean, all that stuff. You might have done that in romantic relationships. And when he bullied me that day, I didn't chase him. So he just cut me off. And then I did go through these cycles like I'm talking about, where I felt sad and grief, and I reached out, and of course he just blamed me. There was no substantial reason for it, apart from he just said, oh, I don't know how we can rebuild this relationship, you know. What had happened was my energy had changed, you see, and I wasn't available for the abuse. But there's a transition. There is a void. Someone wrote on the channel about the void. There is a space where we haven't quite become our solid selves. So, like, we're in this in-between stage where we don't want to take that anymore, but we're not quite robust in being able to be in our own energy. And all that is constant sovereignty. The work I teach in my program, please come in if you can, but like just constant reminders, constant sovereignty, constant reassurance, constant compassion, constant self-partnering, which is self-parenting, and just believing in ourselves, right? Even when it looks like we've messed up, because most of the time, see, I know the difference between a narcissist and a victim of narcissistic abuse when I meet them, because a narcissist will blame everyone else and a victim will often blame themselves, right? And it's not that the narcissist isn't to blame, they totally are. So when I made the video on it's time to stop blaming the narcissist for our circumstances and take our power back, I really wasn't saying they're not to blame, they completely are. But when we look at our lives and feel powerless and say that we've got no chance, no hope, no future because of what happened to us, right? That's trauma. That's because of the trauma, and trauma blocks you from seeing a different future. So all we have to do is keep processing the trauma, being patient with ourselves, knowing that even though the narcissist is to blame, like what happened to us was absolutely horrible, we still get to take control of our circumstances. That's what I was really saying, that like we get to take our power back, we get to take control, and we get to be the ones that can create our reality. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share, guys. I'll put the links in the comments. Lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon.